Welcome everyone to this episode of My Life is a Typo Season 2. I'm super excited with every guest, but especially this one. And I think, if you stick around and listen to her, you'll know why. But without further ado, I'd like to express my gratitude and introduce to everyone Sivani Babu. Thank you so much for showing up. Can you tell us a little bit about you? Like, you have so many different descriptors. How do you describe yourself to someone you've just met?
Sure. Well, first, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. My name's Sivani Babu. I describe myself as the co-founder and CEO of Hidden Compass, which is an independent journalism outlet and a modern exploration society, which is always one that gets some questions. But I'm also a conservation journalist, a nature photographer, and a former lawyer. So lots of hats over the years.
How do you, I mean, which was the first hat that you wore professionally?
Professionally, the first hat I wore was as a middle school teacher.
Mm,
But I was with the program called Teach for America, and I taught eighth grade math for a few years on the US Mexico border in Texas, in McAllen, Texas. But the first career professional hat I wore was as a lawyer.
gotcha. And you are not no longer a practicing lawyer, is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, it's been a little bit more than 10 years, which is flown by.
Yeah. What drew you away from law, and how did you end up to where you are today?
Yeah, it's one of those things where when I tell people I'm no longer practicing, I think a lot of people assume that it's because I didn't like it
Hmm.
or I burnt out, which are two very common reasons that a lot of
Yeah.
lawyers leave the law, which neither was the case for me. I was a federal public defender. I loved the work. I thought I was going to do it forever.
Yeah.
And I had either the fortune or the misfortune, depending on how you look at it, of being employed by the federal government during the sequester, which compared to what is going on today no longer feels nearly as dramatic as it did back then. But
Yeah.
back then they were essentially budget cuts that were so bad that they kicked into place when Congress didn't pass a budget, and it was supposed to be so bad that Congress would never let it happen. So naturally
Mm,
it happened.
yeah.
And I worked for an agency that was really hard hit. I was really fortunate in that I got to keep my job, but I ended up with a month of unpaid vacation. And I was always a traveler. I was already a photographer, had always been a writer my entire life.
Hmm.
That's just how it goes. And I ended up taking my vacation and sailing to Antarctica, as one does.
Yeah. That's
And
amazing.
yeah, and it was not my first trip to Antarctica, but it was my first big sailing trip like that. It was a much smaller group than the first time I had traveled there. And I was writing from down there as well. And I was writing and I was photographing. Uh, and it was the first time that I had sort of revisited that part of my life in a way that wasn't necessarily professional at that point, but I started a blog just to kind of let people know that we were still alive, and it was really just my friends and family because we didn't have any real communication. It wasn't even my own computer. I would sit there with the captain's laptop at night after everyone had gone to bed, and I would type up my little entry and send it off into the world, and I couldn't see it. It was just an email, and I would
Wow.
send it and it would post to this website that I'd set up.
Wow.
That was it. And it had, while I was gone, it had gotten noticed, and I came back, and there was some interest and some offers to do some things for a photography magazine. And so that was the first time I thought about journalism professionally in a more serious way. Journalism had kind of been my first love, but I came back from that trip, and a lot of things kind of coalesced. Right, um, I didn't have the job security that one would have
Mm,
thought that I might have had as a lawyer for the federal government. I also realized that I was probably never going to get a raise. Is what it was looking like at that point in time,
yeah.
which wasn't why I did the work, but it also made it easier to leave the work, right?
Mm,
It wasn't something that was holding me there.
yeah.
I also knew I wanted to leave the town I was living in. Um, I loved my work, but I'm from California originally, and I was practicing in South Texas, and I couldn't get home to see family as often as I liked, and I missed so many things during those years. So a lot of things coalesced. and a big part of that too was being on this sailing trip and just having the time of my life.
Mm,
I got on a boat with 8 other people, none of whom I had ever met. And we left that trip. We when we left Argentina, you're on a trip like that, you're in closed confined spaces, right? There's only one of two ways things are going to go. Either you're all going to
hmm.
hate each other
Yes.
or you're going to love each other. And
Yes.
I ended up becoming really close with the people that I was traveling with, and I had this moment that I didn't recognize at the time, of this very particular moment in Antarctica. And in my journal that I was writing, I was thinking to myself about, like, what do I want? And the thing I wrote in there, and this moment centered around a moonrise, but it was, more nights like tonight, more people like these people, more
Hmm.
moonrises. And that's what I wrote in my
Mm.
journal. Um, and and that was it. And I didn't know exactly what anything was going to look like, but 6 months after I came back from that trip, I was no longer practicing. I moved back to California and jumped into a full-time journalism career as a freelancer.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. I mean, I have a million follow-up questions, but our time is limited. So let me ask one.
Yeah.
For the majority of us humans who have never been to Antarctica, and it is on my list, and I'm gonna get there one day. What do people get wrong about Antarctica?
I think there are several things, and I think the big one is there's the color question, right? Like, everyone always asks me, isn't it just all white? Right?
Mm,
It's just a sea of white. And the reality is there is so much color in Antarctica, but it's gradations of color. Right? It's shades of blue and white and purples and oranges and all the
mhm.
things, but they come at you differently. Um, and the other thing, and I remember this from the very first trip that I went down there, there was a woman who was making her 20th trip on that trip. And
Wow.
I remember her saying to me, everybody comes down for the animals, they come back for the ice. And
Mm,
that was 100% true for me. I fell in love with the ice. That's the reason I keep going back. And I've made 5 trips now. And
wow.
and it's the ice. I mean, that's the animals are great, but I go back for the ice.
That's amazing. Um, I mean, I know I've known you for a couple of years. I'm a wonderful sort of, well, I don't know about wonderful. I enjoy the wonderful. I was going to say I'm a wonderful subscriber, but what does that even mean? I'm a happy
You are
subscriber
a
to Hidden
wonderful
Compass.
subscriber.
I am a happy subscriber to Hidden Compass. Tell us what that is and what that offers, because I enjoy reading it, but I think it's so much more than just pleasure, visual pleasure, and So tell me, what is it that you offer via Hidden Compass?
Sure, and I will say you are in fact a wonderful subscriber, and we love our subscribers. So thank you for supporting what we do.
Yes.
And what Hidden Compass is really an exploration magazine. We're digital, but
Yeah.
we do consider ourselves and function like a magazine. And it is exploration based, but we take a very modern view of what exploration is. And so that's where we started, was with this magazine. You think like old National Geographic, but also very much recognizing that exploration in the way that a lot of people think of it has colonial and exploitative roots, right? And
Yeah.
we wanted to reclaim exploration in a modern way that divorces it from those roots and is really about going deeper and understanding our place in the world. And so it can
Mm,
still be physical exploration, it can still be going to these places, but the purpose of going to them is different now. And it's about discovery and not conquest. And so sometimes that's physical exploration, but it's also recognizing that the frontiers of exploration in the modern age are sometimes very small. So, we've published stories about neuroscience, we publish stories about historical exploration. So, a very broad view of what exploration is. We are also a modern exploration society, and that's where this old National Geographic Society feel comes in.
mhm,
And we wanted to build community around exploration, around this modern view of it. And it's a group of people, so we call it the Alliance. And we have actually two now. We have two communities. One is the Alliance and one is the Nerd Herd, which I also love saying. Um, but the idea was to build a community of people who believe that journalism, science, history, and hope are worth defending, because those are our
mm,
values. And
mm,
so these are folks who not only want to go behind the scenes, because that's a small part of what we offer, but they want to be part of the decisions that are made. They want to be connected to modern exploration, and they want to defend these really big ideas that now more than ever feel, at
Yeah,
least in my lifetime now more than ever, feel like they are under attack and from
yeah.
so many different directions.
And I know you also do events because I've seen some webinars, and I mean I've been there. I've attended. Um, Talk to me about events. Any in-person events? Is it primarily digital? What's that offering like?
So typically our events are digital. However, we are this year, our Ethos of Exploration event, which is our end of year event, is going to be in person in the Bay Area in California, probably Oakland. We've done it in person before, 2 years ago. But part of that is one of the things that we've launched is something called the Pathfinder Prize. And this is
Mm,
our we're in our third year currently, and the prize is now dedicated to funding a short documentary film. And so what's exciting about the year end event is that we premiere the film, and it's the world premiere of that film when we do it. And so that happens at a movie theater in the Bay Area. It's a chance to meet the filmmakers, all of
mm,
those types of things. But we also do virtual events. We have coffees with the co-founders where you can meet myself and my co-founder Sabine Bergman, who is a phenomenal journalist also, and we talk about whatever people want to talk about
yeah,
really. But it's a fun way for us to get to know our community also. I mean, that's the whole idea of this, is that it's community. And so we want to get to know people, and so we love it when people come to those. Um, and we have in the past done speaker series events where we bring in folks to talk about various events, not events, excuse me, various topics. So everything
hmm
from climate change, and we heard from, in one of our first events, we heard from a glaciologist who had been working in the polar regions for 50 years. And he talked about his observations and what he'd seen. And we also sometimes have discussions in those events. We've had discussions about the conflict between journalism and the public and how both of those need each other, but how there's also distrust that goes both ways. And how do we repair that? And what does it mean if we can't repair that? So we have these conversations or these discussion topics and these talks by experts in their fields. And those have been a lot of fun over the years. Um, and we'll be, as we kind of reconfigure what virtual events look like in the year plus to come. Things will look a little bit different, but we're still really excited about the events part of things.
That's awesome. And because of my family, my sister, my niece out in the Bay Area in Alameda. When is that happening? That bigger event, is that in the fall or?
It's in December. It's usually
Okay.
early December, and
Oh,
we'll be picking a date
maybe.
fairly soon. Yeah, we would love to have you.
Okay, that would be awesome because there's
Yeah,
also a lot of birthdays and a lot of reasons for me to be out there in early
absolutely.
December. So that would be amazing. Um, I've so many follow-up questions. One, I mean, I'm just like I wanna be like strategic. I want to make sure that I ask some of the really juicy ones. But I mean, one that comes to mind is, I mean, you're a creator, a writer, journalist, a photojournalist. You're a creative soul, and I've read and viewed some of your amazing work. I recommend everyone who's listening in to do the same. But how do you source talent? How do you source stories and create creative assets from the world? What's your process like? How do you I mean, there's no shortage of talent, of course, but what's your process like?
We take pitches from journalists all over the world, and
Got it.
and we consider ourselves a journalism publication,
Yeah.
but we're a journalism publication. We're rooted in the journalism, but the writing is narrative and creative. And so sometimes we take literary writers and we help them with the journalism aspect.
Mm-mm.
More often we take journalists and we help them with the literary aspect, a little
Gotcha.
bit, because most people are not well versed in both. Some people are,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
fantastic. But we work with journalists all over the world. We take pitches. We have a submissions inbox. It's just submissions at hiddencompass.net. And we have someone who is dedicated to manning those submissions. We publish quarterly. And this is a big part of our business model when we started, has always been about quality over quantity.
Mm-hmm.
And so we publish quarterly, which means we only have so many stories to assign per year. But
Yeah.
that also allows our editing team to work very closely with the writers and to go back and forth. And our process is much more akin to a print magazine process.
Hmm.
We go through several rounds of edits and they're structural, and we talk about how to make this, a hidden compass story, which is cinematic and challenges our readers. We're not afraid of nuance, all of those types of things. We also go through a rigorous fact checking process, which is happening less and less in publications,
Mm.
unfortunately. And so
Yeah.
that is still very much at the center of what we do because we are journalists.
Yeah.
Thank you. We want to get it right. And we want to make sure that when people read what we put out into the world, they can trust it. And so we're very proud of that. So much so that we've started to do things like an interview with our fact checker so people can understand that process.
Love that.
Yeah, I think it's such an important process of journalism, and I think a lot of people don't even know that that is a thing, that there are
Hmm.
people who make a living as researchers who fact check stories before they're published. And it's such an incredible thing that we should be celebrating more of in the publications where it does happen. And there are still plenty where it does, but they're fewer and far between these days. Uh,
Yeah, that's amazing. I'll say, oh, I have a friend who's a copy chief at a magazine. So I have the utmost respect for what she does, but I know that I think some people just don't know that that's an actual profession.
yeah.
Maybe a dying profession. I hope not, knock on wood, but it is a profession. It's legit, you know?
It absolutely
Um,
is, and it's so much fun to talk with our fact checker
yeah.
because she's so good at what she does, and the conversations that come out of that and the things we learn that sometimes are incidental to the story itself but are just really interesting. There are times where the fact checking process itself is as rewarding as the story process.
Mm. Speaking of rewarding, I saw a post, um, I guess in the last couple of months on LinkedIn, vis-a-vis the Red Cross. I think it was. So correct me if I'm wrong. Tell me a little bit about that aspect of your life, because I see you out there. I see you donating your skills, volunteering. I mean, just putting yourself out there in so many different ways, sharing your energy with the world. But I don't really know you in that capacity. So give me some clarity. Like, what is that? How are you involved? What's the capacity in which you've been involved?
Sure. So I started volunteering with the Red Cross in 2020,
Mm,
and I am now both a volunteer as well as a member of the chapter board where I am, the Pacific Coast chapter board. But that for me stemmed out of my previous jobs and careers were were direct service, right? And so I consider journalism a service too, but
mm, mm,
they
mm.
were more direct. I was an assistant federal public defender. I had clients. I was helping someone specifically. And same thing as a teacher, right? I had students and there was that direct connection.
Yeah.
And so as we got deeper and deeper into Hidden Compass and things started taking off and it became the full-time work, that direct connection was not part of it, and I found that I was really missing that. And at the same time, I live in Santa Barbara, which I love. I have evacuated my house twice because of fires, and
Yeah.
so I wanted to know that when those things happen, I had a role to play. That wasn't
Mm.
just me trying to figure out where I could be helpful in the moment, but that I would actually have like a job in that moment.
Wow.
And so I started looking into volunteer opportunities. The Red Cross came up really quickly, and part of what instantly drew me to the Red Cross is that it's a 90% volunteer run organization. And that means that volunteers work in a professional capacity. And so it was a chance to use my professional skills to do some good that is more direct than the stories that I write, which I absolutely think journalism is a service, but it's not
Sure.
as direct.
Yeah.
And so started volunteering in 2020. Some of the first things I did, which it feels like a different lifetime now, but was I worked at vaccination sites during the early part of the
Wow.
pandemic when vaccinations first became available. And that was, I mean, it's very different than the work I do now with the Red Cross, but it was the first way in which I was able to go out and do something in my community. Um,
Wow. A lot of people are feeling hopeless and helpless these days, and I think to me that's a wonderful example of not waiting until disaster strikes, but saying, "Hey, I want to be part of the solution. I'm in a good place, headspace now. Let me plan ahead, so I have a role to play and I can be useful to society." versus just doom scrolling for 7 more hours, or you know what I mean? Like, I know that not everyone can volunteer or donate in the same ways. That's fair, but I think more people than not have that time and that energy and the capacity, and just don't choose not to do that. That's been my observation. And I also think that when I see people doing cool things on Instagram, I am inspired to do the same. Case in point, blood drives and blood donations. I'm now in my second time that I did it this weekend, and God willing, I'll keep doing it until the rest of my life, until I'm no longer able to do it. But because I saw other people with amazing, compelling stories do that, and so now I'm like, hold on a second. I donated once, could potentially save up to 3 lives with that each donation. Let me put myself on Instagram and maybe LinkedIn and say, hey, it didn't kill me. It didn't really hurt, that barely hurt. It was awesome. It was meaningful. If it inspires one other person to donate blood, then that's amplifying impact. It's scaling it. So that's how I see it. And when I see people like you doing awesome things, it just inspires me to donate or volunteer in my local community. So thank you for that impact.
Well, thank you for donating blood. So the Red
Yeah.
Cross collects 40% of the nation's blood supply.
Wow.
And so that's a big part of the Red Cross mission also. And
Yeah.
so thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
It's so important.
Yeah.
And I don't think people realize how easy it is sometimes. I mean,
Yes.
not everybody can donate, and that's
Yes.
that's just the reality.
Sure. Yeah.
But it's easy, and you literally save lives.
Yeah. It's crazy. It's wild and it's beautiful. I wanted to ask, because you're so proactive, you put yourself out there, you do amazing work. It's always about serving others. How did that come to be? Like, were you born and like, hey, I'm going to serve others and be so proactive, or was that cultivated? Who were your mentors, your muses, your inspirers? Like, how did that come to be that you're so awesome?
Well, thank you. But for me, I think it's just the example I was given growing up. Both of my parents were involved in the community. My dad's a physician, and he was in his specialty. He was the only one in the area, so about 40 miles north and 60 miles south, so about 100 miles.
Wow.
Yeah, and so service was just what he did, right? And it
Yeah.
was and it was growing up and recognizing that at times it's not convenient. Right, that but it is still the right thing, and it is still important. And I remember growing up and having these moments of, he didn't have doctors to cover him that easily. He would sometimes have to hire someone to come in. Eventually other doctors could, but it meant that he would look at us on a weekend and be like, all right,
Yeah.
there's no one in the hospital right now. There's none of his patients are in the hospital right now, and let's go to Universal Studios, let's go to Disneyland. And then we would drive the several hours to get there, and we'd get to the parking lot, and he'd get paged, and we'd turn around and go back. Right,
Uh,
but you understand that,
yes.
like, that there is something at stake here that is
Yeah.
obviously
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
important than my weekend.
Yeah.
um and so the service component of things is just what I grew up watching from both of my parents, and
Mm,
watching them, in the ways that they could be incredibly generous, and knowing that that's just how I wanted to live my life too. And
yeah.
it wasn't, I didn't really think anything of it. It's just
Yeah.
it's just
Normal,
who I am.
normalized. I mean,
Yeah,
this is why normalizing certain things is a good thing, right? Normalizing good things is a good thing.
right.
More of that, more of that. Now, this would not be an episode of My Life as a Typo, if I didn't ask the question of, actually, what do people get wrong about you? Not Antarctica anymore. What do people get wrong about you?
I think there are a couple things. I think the first one is the one I mentioned, which is that I left the law because I hated it, and I still deeply love the law.
Yeah.
Um, I which makes a lot of what we're watching happen very hard to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and to not be a part of now. It's one of those things where still have a role to play in today's world, and in fighting back against things, but I'm not currently a practicing lawyer, and so it feels like I'm a little bit on the outside watching this profession that I deeply respect,
Mm-hmm.
and not just the profession, but the rule of law itself,
Yeah.
right? And so there's that. Um, And then the other one that I think is really interesting for me is that I generally am very in control of my emotions, right? And that's why I can go into a disaster zone and why I
Hmm.
can do the thing, why I could be a federal public defender and deal with some of the worst that people can do to each other on a daily
Hmm.
basis and not take it home with me, right? I've
Wow.
always been very good at that. But I think what comes with that is sometimes a perception that it doesn't actually affect, right? That you don't, that you're not processing these things, that they
Yeah.
don't really impact you. And so I think that's one of them for me also, which is which is fine. And then the
Well,
last
you're human. That's how I know you're not AI.
right, right. And we're all human and things affect us differently and we deal with them differently. And
Mm.
I think that is the place where I think sometimes there's a little bit of a disconnect with others who don't quite realize that's what's happening.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
the last one I'll say, it's so funny because I was talking to my sister about this recently. I am an introvert, and no one believes me when I say that.
Yep.
But I 100% am. I mean, no one is 100% anything,
Yes. Yes.
but I
Yeah.
know that that's how I recharge. I like time on my own, and that is how, I get back into the world. But I remember even when I was in law school saying that to someone, and their response was, "Do you know what that word means?"
Hmm. Yeah. That's awesome. It's good to know yourself. And I think I was chatting with someone else the other day, and I said something like, I mean, my memory ain't that sharp anymore. But I think either I've always been an introvert and now I'm just getting better at the like the conversation piece and the networking piece, and the group work is just less draining. I've gotten better at it. Or maybe I wasn't an introvert all along. Maybe I was just socially anxious and now I've gotten over that and like, oh, I'm an ambivert or I'm an extrovert. I'm still figuring that out. I think I
Sure.
have a different understanding depending on the day. But there's something to be said in the last couple of years. It's changed. In my 20s, I was like diehard introvert, like now it's not that anymore, and it's been weird. I have to kind of do some ruminating on that, I think. Anyway, so another question I had for you, because you have so many wins, so many successes, so many things that you do that are really excellent and at a high level, but you are human. So I want to hear, tell me about a misstep or a lesson learned, a tough time in your career, something that didn't quite work out and what you learned from
So, Hidden Compass continues to be, but especially at the beginning, just a very steep learning curve when
it.
we founded it. So Sabine and I met at a bookstore, which
Mm,
is fitting. And we didn't immediately jump into like let's start a business, but we were both freelance journalists who shared both some of the same frustrations and some of the same hopes for our
yeah,
profession
yeah.
and our industry. And we ended up forming this writers group and spent a year plus kind of all beating our heads against the wall because there were stories we wanted to write, stories we wanted to publish, and fewer places that were willing to publish those kinds of stories, nuanced, challenging, not about tourist destinations, right? Like those types of stories and, cross-disciplinary, all the things. And so we started Hidden Compass eventually because we had the moment that I think a lot of founders have of, well, if this thing doesn't exist, maybe I should make it exist. And so that's how we started Hidden Compass, but neither of us came to it with the business background that
Mm,
that you need to start a business,
yeah, yeah.
right? And we had different expectations of what it was going to be. We thought it was going to be a side project and we would have our freelance lives, and for the first, I don't know, year and a half that was kind of true. And then it became clear that there was something bigger possible, so it was a very steep learning curve on the business side for us.
Yeah.
And initially, when we founded the company, we funded it by running workshops, and we would have these writing and photography workshops that we hosted, and what we made from that is how we would fund what was then
Mm,
just a digital magazine. um, and for us, the moment where this all sort of culminated and we had our, like, what are we doing moment, was we hosted an international workshop in outside of Paris. And we it took so much of our time and effort, right, to organize it. The
yeah.
participants had a fabulous time, but there was a moment partway through at
Yeah.
participants were still having a great time, but partway through where we discovered we rented this chateau outside
Mm.
of Paris. It was beautiful. It was great. Um, it also had bed bugs. And so
Uh,
it's a Sunday night in Paris at like 10 o'clock at night, and we are evacuating this
oh
chateau and
no.
trying to find no one's picking up a phone because it's Sunday night in Paris or in France outside of
Yeah,
Paris.
yeah, yeah,
So I am so Sabine is back at the chateau getting participants organized, getting everyone to throw all of their belongings in the
mm,
dryer on high
yeah.
heat for a while,
Yes,
all of
yes,
those
yeah,
things.
yeah.
And I'm driving around Versailles looking for 10 hotel rooms. And so just going into hotel after hotel looking for hotel
Wow.
rooms. And it all worked out and we had great participants. And looking back, it's kind of hilarious, but we had this moment of like, what are we doing? Like, is this
Yeah.
really the battle that we should be fighting? Because what we'd
Mm,
essentially done was start two businesses, and we were using one to fund the other.
mm,
And that was a real moment of learning for us and being
yeah,
like, wait a second, like, this is a different business, and it's not the one we actually are really passionate about, and that this isn't the main business, right? This is trying to fund the business we actually want to fund. Um, and so yeah, so it was really stressful. We were sleep deprived. It was like so many things. Looking back, it's funny to us now, but there
yeah,
was a
yeah.
period of time where we're like, we're just never speaking of this again.
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
And now we're
PTSD. Yeah.
Yeah, and now we've moved past that and we can talk about it and laugh about it. But it was really stressful, and it was a moment of clarity, though, is also
Mm,
what it was. And I think for us a lot of things changed after that point, and we had to really think about the magazine as a business in and of itself, and how was it going to fund itself? And that became the new goal, is creating the business model around that, because we knew we didn't want to do what everyone else does because it wasn't working, right? There were
yeah.
so many publications that were shutting down, and we resented being treated purely as like transactional customers, and being about collecting and selling our data or trying
Yep.
to all of those things, and we didn't want to do those things. And so that forced us to get creative and to learn more about the business side of things, but also to innovate on the business side of things.
Well, I'm glad you can laugh about it, right? Because there's enough time and distance from that experience. But yeah, that's crisis management. That's a skill set that you clearly have, and also like emotional regulation, which is as in my work as a coach, that's the thing that I work on a lot with folks. I'm not a therapist, I make that clear, but like what emotions you bring into the workplace, and sometimes you think, oh, I'm not emotional at the workplace. I'm like, dear man, woman, person, the
Right.
amount of emotions you just shared with me in 90 seconds is
Yeah.
enough to write a novel, or is enough for like a novella on Netflix. Like, please don't tell me that you don't bring emotions to professional settings, because but
Right.
the awareness, right? The self-awareness is something I cultivate. Where do you what do you do, either for fun, or what's your outlet for? Because you work with um when you're doing the disaster stuff, or whether you're just doing your regular day job, the stresses of modern life. What are your creative outlets? What are your outlets of silliness, play, and fun in life? Hobbies, etc.
Yeah, it's interesting because I have taken some of those things and also turned them into my career, but in
Mm-hmm.
different ways. So I
Mm-hmm.
still write for fun. Photography for me is always an outlet. Nature is a
Yes.
huge outlet in
Mm-hmm.
all of its forms, right? I don't
Yeah.
always get to go to Antarctica, but I, all the things that are closer to home, but also friends and family. I mean, really, just finding, and I know I said I was an introvert, but finding the people with
Yeah.
whom, you can laugh, um, and enjoy just being in each other's company, and it's not stressful or draining. All of those types. And that's not to say that there aren't times when people
Yeah.
are going through. That's not what I mean. But the people that you're comfortable being yourself with. So I think those are big ones. I read a ton, like more than is reasonable.
Fiction, not nonfiction, or all of the above. Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah.
Um, so those are big ones for
It's a
me.
good thing to be addicted to. If you're going to be addicted, yeah,
Yes.
it's a good thing.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
amazing.
Yeah. And
Awesome.
yeah, I mean, those are kind of the big ones. There are always other things, right? I love I love theater. I love, I love sports, right? All of those things. Depending on my mood, depending
Yes.
on what, what's going on, like they all fill a different role.
Yeah. You've traveled all over the world. I mean, I don't know. Do you keep tabs on the number of countries, or
I don't. I
that's
don't.
fine?
Yeah.
What's a highlight other than Antarctica, which again I cannot wait to go to. Any other highlight from your world travels?
Yeah, I've got a couple. Um, so Antarctica obviously is always at the top of,
Yes.
and some of that is just the impact that it has had on my life. I mean, career
Mm,
changes and all of these very
yeah.
important moments that it has somehow been a part of. But beyond that, I do a lot of dark sky photography and dark sky conservation work.
Yes.
And
That was
the
the webinar
Yeah,
about visual pollution. Yeah, night pollution.
yeah,
Yeah.
yep. And so the Atacama Desert is one of, it's just an incredible, incredible place. It is
Where's
high,
that at?
so Chile and Bolivia, and it's high desert at times, 16,000 feet. You have these giant, like conical, 19,000-foot volcanoes, and the only other place we know of where these things really exist is Mars.
Oh,
In that same form, right? They're much bigger on Mars, but so it's this incredibly stunning landscape, world-class dark skies, and just a different, if I mean, the places I love the most are the ones that both are other people would consider stark,
yeah.
and they also are the places that make me feel like I'm essentially on another planet. And the Atacama is one of those. I mean, you have
Mm,
these flocks of flamingos at 14,000 feet. I mean, it's just bizarre in the
yeah.
sense that, like, they're not the things that we expect. It's totally natural, but for us
Yes.
coming from not that environment, it feels something, like it feels otherworldly.
Wow.
And the other one, is an interesting highlight, especially in this moment. And I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to go, because I don't know if I ever will again. Was Siberia, and I spent some time at Lake Baikal, and also even farther north with a Nenets family, nomadic reindeer herders, and it was, the landscape is stunning. Um, it is, incredible northern lights, all of the things. Lake Baikal is just another place where, you stand there and it's hard to imagine that this place
Mm,
actually exists in the dead of winter, right? Because
mm,
that's when I like to go to these places. Uh, and spending time with this family of reindeer herders who, spend their lives following the reindeer around the Arctic, because that's their food supply, that's their livelihood, it's all of those things. And learning more, not just about sort of historic culture, but also about the choices that they now have to make, right? They have to choose whether they leave their kids in the town to go to school, or they take them with them when they
mm.
travel around the Arctic, right? And I'm so grateful I had that opportunity, because I don't know if I will ever have that opportunity
Wow. Yeah.
again.
Wow. Incredible. For me, when you talk about some of these really remote places, you're getting, I mean, there are other humans in some of these places too, sure, sometimes, but I don't know. When I go into nature, when I go away from humans, I tap into my own humanity. I come out of those places a kinder, more thoughtful, more in tune with myself, more empathetic human being by getting away from humans.
Absolutely. And there's some really interesting psychology on the power of awe and what that
Mm,
does to people. And sometimes, and awe doesn't have to be nature, but it is a
yeah.
place where we often experience that feeling,
Yes.
and what it does to people. And the studies show that it does make people kinder, and it does
Mm,
make people more generous and more understanding and more
yeah.
empathetic. And I think that's really fascinating. And it's a big part of why I love the night sky so much too. Because assuming we all have access to it, which is a
Yes.
different, which is a separate question, it is sort of the easiest source of awe that exists
Yeah.
in the grand scale, right? Assuming
Wow.
it's dark enough, all we have to do is look up. And
Wow.
so for many of us, if it were visible, it would just be there.
Yeah.
Without having to go somewhere else, without
Mm,
having to, you know, spend money, without having
yeah.
to, right? It's just more easily accessible, assuming it's visible.
I've said this a couple of times. The only reason why I want to be a trillionaire, because I think that's how much money it will take, is so I can literally, I guess I'd have to force people because some people don't want to travel, is give everyone the access and the ability to travel to a place that is unlike anything they've ever been at. So if they've only been in the countryside, go take them to Tokyo. If they've only lived in New York City, take them to the Serengeti or or Siberia. But like, and just let them experience awe and experience nature and or a culture that is exactly opposite of theirs. And for me, that has been so transformational in my life. I've been to dozens of countries, and I can't wait to keep going. Like that to me, because talking online, and trolls and I don't know, it doesn't seem to be creating more empathy. Now there is amazing content. Like I encourage everyone to go and read and sign up for Hidden Compass. There's some sort of gems out there of really good sort of heartwarming, soul thawing content and journalism, but it's rare. And so I think for me, like physically getting someone outside of their phone and in those locations is what transforms hearts and melts their heart. So that's why I want to be a trillionaire, so I can have everyone just travel everywhere at all times. I mean, it's silly, but that's my dream.
I mean, I love that, and I think there's certainly something to be said for travel, but there's also the downside of travel, right? The environmental impact and all of those
Yes.
things as well. And what I think is really interesting about travel is that it doesn't have to be far away, right?
Yes.
I can go to a different neighborhood in my own city and
Hmm.
feel like I am experiencing something very different than what I'm used
Yes.
to. And the same thing with you know, we also know from studies that things like novels and not even fiction, doesn't have to be fiction, but
Mm.
storytelling does the same thing
Yeah.
in different ways, but it has that
Yes.
impact on people. It increases empathy. It shows people cultures that are different than their own, and people who might not even be from a different culture, but people who are different than
Yeah.
themselves. And I think
Love
there are
that.
so many ways for us to get there, and awe can be found in the smallest things as well as the largest. And so
Mm.
there are so many ways for people to get there if they are willing to.
I appreciate that reminder. In fact, I think that proves or supports the point I made earlier about, like, if I see a story online of someone doing something good, like donating or blood or volunteering, that inspires me to do something good.
Sure.
So I believe in the power of that. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about social media and Instagram and all these other things. And that's where I choose to focus my energy most of the time. But I'm not turning a blind eye to all the horror that goes on online either, right? Because there's a
Right.
lot there too. Um, but anyhow, I just want to thank you so much for being you and doing all the things that you do and being all that you are. So thank you for showing up. This means a lot.
Thank you so much.
How can people learn more about you and Hidden Compass? What's the best way for people to find out and reach out?
Best way is to check out the website. So hiddencompass.net is where you can find Hidden Compass. We publish quarterly award-winning stories. Um, and I'll just, one of the things that I am proudest of with Hidden Compass is the quality of the stories
Hmm.
we had from the beginning. And
Yes.
especially when we were just starting out and we saw our stories winning awards alongside pieces from the New Yorker and New York Times Magazine and National Geographic, to know that our small team was producing that quality and we were working with
Yes.
incredible journalists. And so that is something I'm really proud of. So check out the stories on Hidden Compass. And then to find more of my work, I am at SivaniBabu.com, and you can find some of my writing, some of my photography, and a little bit more about my story.
Awesome. I appreciate you sharing a little snippet of that awesome story with us today. Thank you again and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been wonderful. Thank you.
Bye bye.